I'm going to show you how to make a welt or flap pocket. So these are the 4 pattern pieces. One of them is a pocket bag. The rectangular one is the welt and flap pocket garment section. So taking the garment section, as you can see, you have the 4 dots, which I'm just going to put pins through. So this is where your pocket is going to be placed. Push your pins through each dot to the other side. I've already interfaced the other side. As you can see, there's a little rectangle of interfacing which will be on the back of the pocket, and this was a pattern piece, interfacing only, and fuse it onto the back of your fabric, which may be calico or could be wool. Once you've put your little markings through with your pins, then mark through with the chalk pencil. Make sure you do this very accurately because you need your pocket to be accurate and even. So remove the pins and just make sure you've got the 4 little dots marked on the back of your garment section on top of the interfacing. Once you've done this, I'd like you to just draw the lines between each dot. So these lines that you're drawing in now will be stitched along in a little while. So you're putting the markings on the back of the interfacing, which is on the wrong side of your garment section. Okay, so that's the 4 dots done. So I've just traced this, which is on the pattern, onto the garment. And then what I've done now is I've traced the inner section of it. So I've got the 2 triangles and the inner line, and put a little line in the middle. Okay, so this is a pocket welt and flap, and as you can see, the seam allowance is 0.5 centimeters. This should be interfaced. So that's my fabric, and I've interfaced it already. So the back of it's interfaced. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it lengthways, and I'm going to sew the 2 ends together. This will actually form the welt. It could be a flap if you don't sew it down, but today I'm going to make this into a welt. So taking your sewing machine, making sure it's pinned and it's accurate, follow your little notches, 0.5 seam allowance, and just sew either end of the welt together, not forgetting to backstitch either end because we don't want it to come undone. So down to the fold and then back again with a couple of stitches, and then machine the other end. 0.5 seam allowance, really important, not a big seam allowance. And then a couple of back stitches to finish. Trim off any threads. Okay, and then I'm going to clip the corners of the folded edge. I'm just going to clip the corners, and I can show you here that's the folded edge, and then I'm going to turn it through to make our welt, or again it could be a flap, but in this instance it's a welt. So to get the corners nice, just grab a pin and then just gently pick the corners out to make sure it's a nice rectangular shape. Okay, so from here I'm going to go to take it to the iron and give it a gentle press with the iron. This just makes sure your rectangle is nice and straight. Okay, so this is my garment section. As you can see, the 2 dots either side. I'm just going to put pins. So the lower section is longer than the top section, so just remember that. Bringing your pins to the front, to the garment, you're going to place the welt between the 2 pins with a seam allowance of 0.5. So don't forget, the seam allowance should just pop up 0.5 above the pins, and just pin the welt into place to stop it from moving. Okay, and check that it runs along the line on the back, because all your workings are on the back of this. You need to keep turning the pattern piece, the fabric over and looking at the other side. There we go. So my pins are along the lower line. Okay, take the pins out and then secure into place. So I'm going to sew this welt to the fabric, and I don't want to come off the welt at all, so I'm going to start on the welt and I'm going to finish on the welt. So this is just a holding stitch. It's going to hold it into place so it doesn't move, because it's going to be sewn again. So don't let any of the stitches come off either end of the welt. So just a little back stitch, and you can do this by hand using your machine, and then take any pins out if you're a little bit nervous. So remember, you're stitching this on at 0.5 centimeters, and you should be right on the line that's drawn on the back of your garment section. And again, don't come off the end of your welt. Okay, then trim your seam allowances down, check it's okay at the back and it's in place, trim any loose threads, and then what you need to do now is clip the corners that you've just sewn. So you're just going to take off a corner on each edge, okay, like so. Okay, so now we're ready for the next section. As you can see on the back, it fits beautifully. So you're going to take the pocket bag or lining, and then you're going to put these two together. So take your pattern off, put your pins through to mark the same shape on the pocket bag. So I've just put a couple of pins through, and I'm going to chalk them on the back, and that is on the longer section. As you can see, it's longer one side than it is the other. So take the pins out, and this needs to be placed on the correct way of your pattern, with the longer part of the pocket bag at the top. Okay, so there are my two markings. So if I grab my other section where I've just sewn my welt on, I'm going to put that there, and the longer part of the lining of the pocket is at the top, and the two dots sit in place in line with the dots that were previously marked. So you need to get those in place, one either side. Just make sure they're lined up with the dots underneath and the edge of the welt, and pin your lining in place, making sure it's nice and smooth. Okay, so you need to move your pins because you just want to hold the lining into place. Oh, I've slipped here. Just check my dots in the right place again, and then pin just outside. So I'm just pinning around the opening of what will become the opening of my welt. Okay, so turning it over, and I can follow where I've stitched before. The little knot, the little mark in the middle is an indicator of where I'm going to start. You never start in the corner, you always start along the straight line of the welt. So start in the middle, do a couple of stitches all the way along. Now you don't want to come off the edge here, you want to come just along to the very, very edge of the welt, and then the needle just comes just off the welt, not a whole stitch, but just down the side of the welt, and then follow your markings, and then pivot and along the back line to the next dot, and then needle in the dot, pivot, and then you want to come to the very, very edge of the welt, so the needle is just off of the edge of the welt, but not a stitch off, just down the side of the welt, and then stitch across to where you started, going over your first few stitches, and then a couple of back stitches. Okay, snip your threads and check that it's okay on both sides. and I'm going to remove my pins. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut down the very center line of my pocket sample. Okay, so I've given it a snip, made an opening, and now I can just cut along the center line and out along the triangle lines to the very dot, corner of the dot, all 4 of them. So be very, very careful you don't snip your threads here, but just go very close as you can to the corner where you've pivoted your machine to come around the corner. Okay, if you don't go close enough, the fabric won't come through smoothly. There we go. So I need to go and work on the iron now. So here I am on the iron, and I'm just going to take the pocket bag and push it through the letterbox shape that we've just sewn. Okay, as you can see, it's come through and the welt is there, and on the back you can see where it's been stitched, and I've got a nice opening. So I'm just going to clarify this seam along the top of the pocket, gently press it with the iron. Okay, then I'm going to pull the welt up and just give it a gentle press, and just gently tug the lining fabric to create the shape. You can see that it should sit quite nicely without any little creases. So give it a gentle tug and then gently press it with the iron, opening out the shape that you've just stitched. Okay, and just gently press it, just very lightly, because you need to turn it over and then press it again, and we don't want any creases on the correct side. So get some steam, give it a gentle press with the iron. Okay, there we go. So very, very gently, making sure your sample looks good. There we go. So it's very neat to either side. There's no big gaps, and the welt's not caught at all. The welt is quite free. So moving to the back, smooth it down. You can see your pocket's going to fit. Back at the sewing machine, we're going to look at the back of the pocket. Okay, so I'm now going to sew the tiny triangles to the lining of the pocket. As you can see where you've stitched it before, just going to pop a pin in to stop it from moving, and then I'm going to restitch across there, sewing the previous stitch line to the pocket bag. So all you need to do here is a few stitches back and forth, so about 4 or 5 stitches along that line, back and forth, securing the side of the pocket bag to the pocket opening. This reinforces it, so when you put your hand in and out the pocket, it strengthens the side of it. So that's one done. So onto the other side, and I'm just going to machine the second little triangle along the stitch line, the previous stitch line, to the pocket lining. So a few little stitches back and forth just to hold it into place. Snip off any loose threads at this stage, then just check that everything's okay. Both sides are secured and stitched down. As you can see, they're stitched on the back as well, so just trim off any loose threads. So now all that's left to do is to machine around the zip bag, the bag. Okay, so pop some pins in, and then I'm going to machine round. As this is a lined garment, or it would be going into a lined jacket, there would be no reason for you to overlock, so we're just going to machine round. If you were going to put this pocket onto a pair of trousers without a lining, once you've stitched round, you would therefore overlock around the outside edge as well. So just stitch from your pattern. The seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters. So remove your pins as you go and just machine round the pocket bag. If your pocket bag doesn't quite fit, then you can always trim anything away afterwards, but it should be fine. Just sew up to the edge when you get to the very end, little back stitch, and then trim off your loose threads, both ends. You can give it a gentle press. Now we're ready to just stitch either side of the welt to stitch it, to stop it from moving around. If it was a flap, it would be up the other way and it wouldn't be stitched down, but we're doing a welt sample, so I'm just going to stitch the welt down. So make sure you've got a nice small stitch now, so adjust your stitch to around about a 2, then just very carefully up the very edge of the welt, don't pop off the top of the welt, and a few little back stitches so it's nice and neat. So you're just stitching your welt down. Okay, and again use a small machine stitch, possibly a 2, and then repeat on this side. So a couple of stitches forwards and back. Remember, machine control, just use your hands on the wheel, then up to the very top. Don't come off the top of the welt, and then just backward for a few little back stitches, just to strengthen it, to make sure it doesn't come apart when you put your hand in the welt. Trim off any loose threads, and then front and back, and that's your welt pocket sample complete.